The Spanish flu was a pandemic caused by the influenza virus between 1918 and 1919 that affected about a third of the world's population. Influenza virus is mainly found in goose-like bird species. This virus can be transmitted to humans through pigs. In addition to the Spaniards who gave the pandemic its name, European countries such as France, England and Italy have also been hit hard during the Spanish flu pandemic. The Spanish flu, which tends to affect people of all ages, has had very serious consequences, as it is more severe in vulnerable people such as children and the elderly. It is claimed that the First World War ended because of the Spanish flu. The first Spanish flu case is believed to have emerged in the spring of 1918. During this period, the serious illness of the soldiers of the European countries participating in the First World War brought to mind the thought that the underlying cause might be an epidemic. Towards the end of May 1918, the epidemic spread from Europe to North Africa, first to India, and as of July of the same year, it spread to China and Australia, affecting the whole world. What are the symptoms of the Spanish flu? In the first wave of the Spanish flu, which is generally thought to occur in 3 waves, flu-like symptoms were detected in people who were usually infected. The second wave of the epidemic, which started in August 1918, was much more deadly than the first wave of the epidemic. The mutation of the virus during the first wave was cited as the reason why the second wave of the epidemic was more deadly. The second wave of the Spanish flu, which lasted for about 6 months, had very traumatic effects. When the war and the epidemic coincided with the same period, the death toll increased a lot. Millions of people due to both the World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. Food, drinking water, medicine, vaccines and clean clothes became inaccessible. Moreover, the peak of the number of people who lost their lives during this period of the epidemic was shown as the spread of the virus all over the world. The virus that caused the Spanish flu spread rapidly to many geographies of the world, especially Africa and Asia, during this period. The symptoms that occur in people with Spanish flu, which can be fatal, are generally as follows: nose bleeding, pneumonia, encephalitis, fever exceeding 40 degrees, kidney problems such as nephritic syndrome, coma. During the pandemic process, these life-threatening symptoms had serious consequences for all segments of society, regardless of class. How many people died in the Spanish flu epidemic? In the Spanish flu epidemic, an influenza virus pandemic, the number of people infected with the disease is estimated to be close to 500 million. It is estimated that the number of people who lost their lives due to this epidemic is over 50 million. The lack of a cure for the disease led the health professionals working at that time to improvise treatment practices aimed at relieving the symptoms only in humans. Soldiers who fell ill during the war and later returned to their homeland played an important role in the aggravation of the course of the pandemic by causing the disease to spread in those regions. After the epidemic was recognized by the authorities at that time, studies on measures to be taken against the epidemic began in Europe as of August 1918. European countries, which decided to tighten the measures as of October, stopped the activities of businesses such as cinemas and theaters where people come together. European countries, which also took precautions regarding Sunday rituals, added to their decisions the condition that the sermon should not exceed 5 minutes. Cleaning and disinfecting social living spaces such as streets, churches and workshops has been one of the most important steps taken to prevent the epidemic. Regulating and reducing the number of passengers in public transport is another important step to prevent the spread of the disease. Scientists thought there were many reasons why people continued to die from the Spanish flu despite the measures taken. Bacterial infections, measles, malaria and nutritional deficiencies added to the Spanish flu are among the causes that lead to the fatal course of this disease. The inability to prevent the Spanish epidemic despite the measures taken has led to the emergence of various public health initiatives. Soap and clean water were given to patients in poor condition, sewerage works were accelerated, and the decisions were published in the newspaper in order to raise public awareness. In regions where the death toll has increased excessively, Special areas where the bodies of those who lost their lives from the Spanish flu are collected have been determined, and ceremonies such as funerals are prohibited. About 25 million people died in the first 6 months of the Spanish flu epidemic. In this epidemic, consisting of 3 waves, the second wave, which occurred especially between November and December of 1918, was the period when the death rates of the Spanish flu epidemic were the highest. Aside from the lack of any specific treatment for this disease, some improvised treatments tried at that time may have caused the disease to be fatal in some individuals. Some health authorities of the time, who recommended extremely high doses of aspirin to people who caught the Spanish flu, caused the deaths of patients due to internal bleeding. By December 1918, the epidemic came to a halt in many parts of the world. The Australian government, which decided to lift the pandemic measures early in the first months of 1919, paid the price of these decisions with 12,000 new cases. The end date of the epidemic for the Northern Hemisphere is May 1919. The third wave started in Japan towards the end of 1919, and the Spanish flu epidemic ended in 1920 in that country. The 1918 Spanish flu epidemic took its place in history as an important infectious disease with high mortality rates that resulted in a global catastrophe. Samples taken from soldiers who died from the Spanish flu and from soldiers who were frozen and stored allowed the analysis of the virus that caused the disease. The Spanish flu also provided important information and experience to the future on what measures can be taken to protect public health during epidemic periods, how to ensure hygienic conditions, and how to follow up patients with filiation studies. After the Spanish flu, the influenza virus that caused this disease underwent various mutations and started to follow a less deadly course. The most common subtypes of this virus, now called seasonal flu outbreaks, are identified and included in your flu vaccine. Bacterial pneumonia cases added to Spanish flu, which was an important cause of death during the Spanish flu period, are among the diseases that can be controlled with appropriate antibiotic treatment today.